everyone, and welcome back to Getting Started with World Creator 2. I'm Tyler, and today we are going to cover how to create a mountain range using the path tool and what adjustments to alter to get a realistic effect. Now, creating a mountain range with the path tool is not the only method of doing this, and it's certainly not the best method of doing it, but it is one of the many ways we could go about making a mountain range. So what I have here is a 4K terrain size so we can get a reasonable size to our range. That way we have enough detail to work with. First up, I'm going to make sure that my terrain is relatively flat so that we can let the mountain range stand out and shine. I'll ensure to leave a little bit of a detail into the lower parts of the mountain so that we can have something to look at other than just a perfect flat terrain. So instead of just using the edit shape and flatten the terrain, I'm going to use the method of edit curve. I'm just going to increase my radius and make sure things are relatively flat. And whoa, for this first part, I want the multi-frame generation off because I want you to see everything happening as it's happening. And so we're just going to flatten this out a tad and make sure you hit the S for smooth curve a few times or 100 times so that this is nice and smooth. And as I said, you can see here, there's a little bit of detail left, and that's just fine. And as we've done before, we just need to go ahead and add our path. Let's make this the path. And that's all we're going to put on this layer. Go to Design, Path, click OK, add the path, edit the path, and let's go ahead and just make a very nice S-curve real quick. And if you can't remember, I am left mouse clicking. Now, when thinking about the path of the ridgeline to your mountain sketch, you don't want to have the nodes too close together, as later on, depending on the amount of detail you add, you may get some strange artifacts when these 2 points here, for example, or these 2 points meet out here. But don't worry about that, as that's all later on. We can add more nodes, take nodes away as we've learned, so don't stress out about that. So we have our thin line here, and of course, that's not going to represent a mountain range at all. So what we need to do is we need to raise this path to an approximate location to how high we want our ridge line to be. It doesn't have to be exactly the maximum height, but we want to give it a little bit of depth. And don't worry about making this precise. We can always adjust our heights with these adjustment nodes here by making it higher or lower as you see fit. So let's just start off by setting our height offset here to something around 300. Perfect. And you can see my tessellation is not set up correctly. Tessellation distance, let's just set this to, well, 10,000 works. Now we want to increase the overall width of the entire path. So we're going to do that here, and you're going to set it to something maybe around 250 or 300 as well, just to get something to start off with. I'm going to move this node over here a tad, and this one likewise. Actually, let's just redesign this just a little bit. So I want this curve to be pretty exaggerated, but not too exaggerated. And to make sure that the ridge peak here isn't completely flat, we need to set our smoothness all the way to 1. So we get a nice sharp edge right at the very top. And then so that our mountain doesn't have this sheer drop off, this very last node, I'm going to decrease until it gets pretty close to the bottom. There, so it's nice and flat. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And this is just to ensure that all the filters we add don't have just a sharp cutoff. And they technically won't. The filters like erosion or fluvial or anything like that is going to cut this off, but I just want to go ahead and do this for the sake of having it done so that we can have a nice tailed off mountain. And this doesn't look like much yet, but don't forget we're going to be adding a lot of detail to this. Now, in most cases, mountain ranges have striations of movement and erosion, whether that be on a macro scale or even more so on a micro scale. We will achieve this effect by adjusting our noise scale, our scale factor, and sometimes the segment offset. Not so much here, but we're just going to go ahead and adjust it for adjustment's sake. We also would be wise, since we are designing a large scaled item, to make sure that we are on a lower step level. You see here by default, 6 is what you're given, and that is not a good step level, of course, to create something that has an astronomical amount of detail or something that's going to be this big. I would recommend setting this to something either 1, 2, or 3. We're going to set ours to 2, and you can see all this detail that has just been added to our ridge here. Now, as a reminder, noise factor adjusts how long the noise is stretched from the spline line of the path. So it adjusts how wide the detail is. Noise scale, on the other hand, adjusts the size of the noise between the frequency levels of each striation. So the noise factor is going to make a zigzag striation, and we're going to adjust that size. And the scale adjusts how the distance between each of those striations are. And as another reminder, the segment offset adjusts how far the path's subdivisions are. So a smaller number results in a more smooth path, while a higher number makes the path's subdivisions spread further apart, making it appear jagged. But in this case, since we are on a very low step level, this isn't going to make much of a difference. As I adjust it up and down, you can barely see any effect at all in the range. But if we take this level step up to something like 8, and we adjust, you can see it is adjusting the different levels of detail for the polyline. So where this is doesn't technically matter until you start worrying about the high level steps of roads, for example. I'm just going to put this back down to 2, and I'm just going to keep this at 50. So first up, just to get a decent look, I'm going to change the noise scale to something like 18 and the noise factor to something like 0.49. All right. And I'll go through and show you what each one of these has done. So remember, the noise factor adjusts how wide these striations are. So if I take this slider and go to the right, you can see the striations and the effect is getting wider. And of course, there is a max value here. So to make them even wider, we just need to adjust the widths of our nodes here to make sure that these striations stick out much, much further. And those particle effects I was talking about is whenever you have a width that is so long here and a node that is really long here, you can see you're starting to cross the paths. Like for this little piece, for example, is crossing the path. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something you have to consider depending on what your effect that you're after is. Let's just drop this back down to something like 0.49. And whenever we increase the noise scale, you can see the striations in the heat map are getting closer and closer together. And when you go further down, the striations are widening out a lot more. So if you want a really nice, smooth mountain range, like a really old looking one, you want the noise scale to be relatively low so that everything is nice and gradual from node to node. A young mountain like the Rocky Mountains, you're going to want a noise scale that's a little bit higher because it's going to have a whole lot more striations effects, a whole lot more planetary shifts, basically. So let's go ahead and just adjust these a little bit more. I want this to be much wider. On top of that, I want this to be much, much higher. I want this node to be higher, this node to be lower, and somewhere around over here. I'm just going to go through and adjust some different things. I want it to be a slight high peak here, the highest peak right here, a very slight peak here, and tailed off. A little bit of a peak here. Make sure this is wider. And you can see that right here, this is one of those effects that I was talking about. We need to just pull this closer to us a little bit. There we go. So we have a nice straight secondary ridge. Let's adjust this till we like something a little bit better. see what this is like. Okay, this is good for now. So we're going to be done with our path. And we're going to come back to the path in a little bit. I'm going to show you another neat trick that we could achieve. But actually, I apologize. Let's go back here. All right, so this is just something we're going to start off with. And I'm going to just, for the sake, I'm just going to turn off my shadows. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add all of our detail to this mountain range. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add layer so we can have this as our macro detail. All right, so the first thing I would like to do is I'm going to, where is it at? Distort. Believe it or not, I'm going to add a little bit of distortion. And that's the end of the tutorial. There we go. Actually, just kidding. So this, we need to turn these settings pretty far down, but I'm actually going to turn the strength up. I'm going to make sure the lengths of this are somewhere around 30 and make sure the scale is a little bit higher. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to make sure the striations have a little bit of a curve. This might be a little bit too much, but before I change much, I'm actually going to drop this down a little bit, increase this a tad, and increase that one. And I'll explain more of the level steps in a later video, actually, the next video, to be honest. But anyway, I want there to be some curves to all the striations. This might be a little bit too much. Let's just see what we can adjust here. Okay, as you can see that it's got a nice little S curves here in the striations. And that's exactly what I want to add a little bit of more variation to our ridgeline here. Now I want to go ahead and add another filter. And under the effect, I want to add the rugged filter, but I want the ruggedness to be turned down a good bit, probably to 75. And the next one I want to add is, I didn't do this before, but we're going to add the mountain effect. And we need to turn this strength down pretty low. Now you're probably saying this is looking pretty crazy, but let's go ahead and add our ridged. And all of these in combination have a really nice effect. I want to turn this ridge filter up to 150. Now this is looking a lot better. Let's turn the ruggedness back up a tad, because the ruggedness gives us these really nice sheer effects to our mountain, because we're making a kind of a young mountain right now. And I'll show you in a little bit of how we can make more of a young mountain by adding a very nice smooth effect on top of this. So as you can see really well now, there is a sub ridge here, which is a striation that we made, another one, and so on and so forth. If you look at mountain ranges on top of Google Earth, you'll see that they almost look like lightning bolts. And that's for, mountain ranges that have a very prominent direction. Some mountain ranges like the Smoky Mountains, for example, it's like this, but if you scattered them everywhere. I'm actually going to show you how to do that in here in just a few minutes. And mountains such as in the Rocky Mountains are more defined as stripes of ridges. And I'll be sure to cover different designs of these later on in other mountain range and mountain peak videos. Now, if we really want to make this mountain range extremely young, even younger than the Rockies, or something that's an area that's like desert mountains that are very sharp and jagged, just by an example, if you go to canyon sand covered, it's going to give a very sharp edge effect to our mountains. And we're going to go ahead and use this, but turn our sharpness down to something like 2. And our effect down to 45, maybe the sharpness strength even lower. All right, this is good because this gives us a nice, the one good thing about the sand covered canyon effect is the lower portions of this effect are nice and smooth, has a nice gradient down to lower flat regions, and things that are more vertical get a really nice rocky, sharp effect. Turn this down just maybe to 18. There we go. And actually, I want to go back to our path, edit the path, and I want to bring this up a tad. I'm going to widen this out. There we go. That's better. All right, done editing in our path. There are so many possibilities you can do here, but this is the overall effect I was hoping to achieve, at least for now. All right, so now that we have this, we need to apply some erosion. So we're going to add a new layer here and just call this erosion effects. Add erosion, and the first one we're going to add is fluvial. Now, looking good, looking good. Just pan around here and see what we've got. And again, this is representing a pretty rocky looking. That's almost too much to deal with. Let's turn our strength down to 100. For this next bit, I'm just going to go ahead and turn on multi-frame generation and do a quick save, just in case my computer decides to explode on me. Now also, since this is still just a tad bit too much of the rockiness factor, we could smooth these down even further by decreasing some of the strength of our nodes, but I still, sorry, not our nodes, but our macro detail filters, but I still want that detail to be present. But the last filter I want to go and add here, under general, we can do smooth ridges. And this is going to make our terrain look extremely odd right up front. As you can see now, it just looks like someone just took a blowtorch to the top of the mountain range and completely melted it. But that's not exactly what we want. We are going to decrease these pretty significantly just to get a very subtle effect. And you can see now, this has just added a nice little curve, even on top of all this erosion. This applies to everything that's ridged. Now, we still have a nice sharp edge to a degree. You can see on this side, it's more of a sheer cliff action, and from on this side, it's more smooth. That's just a combination of all the filters that we have here. But even this nice ridge, semi-small peak here is all due to the ridged filter. But these small ridges just adds an effect over, a smooth effect over the whole thing. As you can see up here now, this is less rocky. Ooh, that's a very steep one. And things like this do occur in real life, but if you don't want this to be so sharp, you can adjust your canyon sand covered settings to widen this a tad, or even under the mountains, you can turn up the general strength just a little bit and it'll bubble these out, make them a little bit wider. Or, which I will show you in another mountain video, is you could take what you have here done with the path filter and we'll create an area and adjust the height at a very low level, the strength of this area, and we'll sculpt some even more sub-ridges in between all these striations, which is very fun. I'll show you how to do this by hand later on. And now one of the new filters I want to go ahead and show you is the sedimentation layer. We can go ahead and add some sedimentation. And as you can see, this effect took together pretty nicely. It added some sediment filling in between all the concave parts of the terrain, or convex part of the terrain, my bad. But this effect is a little bit too much. So if you take the length down to around something about 2, you can see now we've all those, the fluvial erosion that we have is filled in just a little bit more, because before this was just cut in really deep with that fluvial erosion. And it's there, it's present, but now it's got a soft, smooth inset based on the sedimentation layer that we've had here. We could also, if we wanted to, and since these are very sheer, these very steep edges. We could take it to a slope effect, and the high value here, we can just set it to something like 0.25. And this doesn't look too bad, but I want to decrease this is even more. So let's say 75. Okay, so doing that little bit of adjustment, my computer did not like that, but I've reverted back. I've got 100 strength and the length set at 2, and I like the way this is just for now. I'm not too worried about it. But I'm going to go ahead and turn the sediment off real quick because I want to show you guys one other really neat thing with the path tool, actually. So now that we have all of our detail that we want to have on our mountain range, we're going to add a couple more, just a little bit, but they're very GPU intensive. I want to go back to the mountain path. And one really cool thing to consider is the noise select. Yes, it is hidden down here. So the noise select will take the path itself, so the edit the path, and if you add a noise select on top of this, all the heat map here is basically going to be adjusted based on the noise select. I'm not going to show it here, but I'm going to go ahead and hit noise select, and it is completely different. So let's go ahead and turn up on our heat maps here. And this is the noise that we are generating. So if we edit the path itself is still in place, but everything that is white is cutting in and affecting the heat map of the path itself. So everything in here, all of this red, it doesn't represent it very well, but everything that you see that is red is being cut away by everything that is not red here. So this is just a procedural texture effect basically on top of everything, and it has a really nice effect. So let's just turn this off. Actually, let's turn the heat map back on. So now that you can see what this is doing with no, I did not want to save actually. Thank you very much. Now you can see what this is doing without with having the noise select on. It's adjusting everything just really nicely, and this is a really nice, good, smooth, subtle mountain range, kind of a small slope. But I want to go ahead and actually let's take this size and just increase it. And the scale. What the scale does is it makes, as you can see, the heat map is much, much finer. And this is the effect that we get. It's a little subtle, but I'm going to change this down to say 10. And what this heat map is, it's much fatter, and it's mostly affecting right through here. But what I want to go ahead and do is this factor low. I want to increase it a little bit. And what the factor low is doing is it is increasing the amount of the heat map, and it's decreasing the white amount. So it's sharpening the edges. So if we take this back to the low, you can see it's much more of a gradient effect. And now let's go ahead and increase our white effect. So let's decrease the highs. This is probably going to take a little bit longer because we're affecting the path even more so. And as you can see here, it has severely affected our path. And if we want to, let's go ahead and just increase our world size. And what this does is it makes the entire procedural generation wider in scale. All right, so now I want to go ahead and just one more time go through this and make the what's affected really fat. So we're going to decrease this down to 5. And then I'm going to make our world size probably 1200. Okay, and now I'm going to decrease the high factor just a little bit and increase the low factor just a tad to sharpen up the edges of the generated map. All right, so now we have an even more, we have a very interesting effect. And you can pretty much see what this is doing. It's making a very drastic change. So that is just one way you can alter the state of the terrain. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off the noise select here and go back to what we originally had. All right, and I'm going to go back to scroll up to the top. There we go. And I'm going to turn back on sediment. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to turn sediment off because I'm going to do one more erosion effect just before we do this one. And the one that I'm going to do is right before erosion fluvial is go ahead and add, actually, let me just do a quick save because erosion filter really hates me sometimes. So I'm going to add the erosion filter and then watch the terrain explode. All right, so I'm just going to make a few adjustments. I'm going to make the wideness 35 or 36. I'm going to make the sharpness, if I could select, I'll make the sharpness 5 and then lower the deepness to about 4. And let's just see where we get with this. I may have to adjust the smoothness a little bit. Okay, so what this did is it added more deep cavity erosion effects. I want the wideness to actually increase to something like 50. Let's see what happens here. And now actually I want to go ahead and position the erosion in front of the fluvial because the erosion is going to act as our macro detail for erosion effects. And the erosion fluvial is more the micro detail. So the heavy erosion is going to add extra parts of striations to our mountain range. Like you can see right through here, there's one. It carved this edge a little bit more. And the reason why I have it much wider is so that it doesn't show rivers and stuff as much. We're just really wanting to have the erosion filter to carve mass chunks out of the mountain to add more macro detail. Like even through here, you can see it carved this. It carved all the way down through here and here. Even more so right there. And never mind the bottom, we'll actually turn that off in a sec. It cut more through here. It added more detail right around this edge. And the reason why we added that distort is you can see the distort filter we added earlier made the ridgeline make more of an S shape ever so slightly. And in combination with the erosion filter, it takes that curve into effect in the calculations and makes it much more pronounced. So you can see water would flow down these valleys in between all the distorted ridge lines. And I'll make the, turn on observer tools. I'm going to see what the height is here. The height select. Make the lower level about 150. And then make the height smoothness about 50. And we'll let that generate and see where we get. Okay, so that didn't do a whole lot. So let's change this to 250. There we go. We could see it starting to add more of the effect here. And I had to increase the top of the height range because it was clipping off the top of my mountain. And let's just make this. Actually, you know what? That's just fine because I don't really care so much about the valley in this case. So let's turn this off, scroll around, and you can see our effects are still taking place. And I do remember we had a node right over here, but how this worked out is it's very interesting. Let's go back. We had a node here, but maybe if we increase this just a tad, we might have a small little hill. This is one of those sharp curved edges I was telling you about because we have this node is so much wider than this node, and this node is really close to each other. When we have something on this scale, it creates areas of effects that you weren't expecting before. So this piece is trying to extend beyond where this arrow is because this node is wide and is trying to proportionally scale it between this node and this node and this node. So let's go ahead and just say done with our path. And this is a really nice corner here. I actually probably like this corner much better than the other side. But this is the effect that we are getting. So it's pretty neat the things that you could do with the path tool. And as I said again, it's one of the things that you can do to create interesting mountain ranges. I'm going to go, actually, let's go back to here. And let's just decrease this height a tad. And if you're going to be doing all these effects while the mountain, that's much better. While the filters are on, I would suggest just going over here and turning off the filters icon so you can shape it a little easier. Oh, unless you have something like a 1080 Ti, then it would work out much, much better. All right, so this mountain range represents something that is very young and something like the Rocky Mountains. So if we want to make this more of a very young mountain, we would not have used the canyon sand cover or the rugged. We'd still have mountains and ridged, and we would still have the and apparently for some reason one of my other filters is missing. I wonder why it got removed, but that is the filter of smooth ridges that we did before. I think what happened is whenever the program crashed, the save for the location where the smooth ridges was at is not present. So we're going to turn these back down to something really low and maybe the strength up a tad and see where we get. This is why we save people, so we don't lose things, but apparently I was not paying attention to that and we lost it even more. All right, I like this a lot better. So the smooth, it's ever so slightly smooth more. I'm going to change this to 10 just so we can get our final image. And this is looking really good. Now this is just one effect that we could take in mountain ranges. You can do several of these paths in conjunction with this one. So you can do another small one here or another one around here. And when it comes to mountain ranges, when you think about the paths that you're designing, you have to design it based on the geological location that you're wanting to take place. So things like in a desert, they're going to be very sporadic, but places like in the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachian Mountains, they're going to be following a directional pattern, but the pattern itself is very, very noisy, which is why you would go back to the path filter and add the noise effect and broaden that path even further so we can get a web, a lightning bolt essentially of different mountain striation effects. And another way is you wouldn't even have to create a path filter. You can use the sculpting techniques or just the base shape techniques to create your mountain range that you want, and just basically use the filters to create some realistic looks with the mountain shapes and patterns across your entire terrain. I'll be sure to cover in later videos all these various types of ways of creating mountain ranges and mountain peaks, and through sculpting and filters, and it should be a pretty fun mini-series. So now that we've learned how to create a mountain range using a path, take that path and detail it with several different filters, create various effects to get the outcome of the mountain range that we want. In the next official video, I will be going over the ins and outs to something that a lot of people, I believe, are having a little trouble with, and I hope to bring some light to the situation, and that is to understanding everything there is to know about and how to use the level step system and all the strength sliders. Till then, I'll see you in the next one.